My name is Brandon Hodge. I'm sitting in the middle of my mysterious planchette archive.
This is the Scripto pendule. It's actually an automatic writing pendulum.
What's this cone?
That is a spirit trumpet.
Ooh.
Huh. A good example of that is this sort of quack healing device down here.
Ooh.
Bloody tear.
I do have one planchette in the collection that if it's going to carry any spirits with it, this would definitely be the one. And one has survived to the modern day. It is the oldest spirit communication device known to have survived by 15 years or so, predating anything in any other collection, museum or otherwise. And it's right there.
Wow. So we're now here at Brandon's house. We have, water dripping everywhere. Yeah, it's raining. And we're about to get a private tour of his Ouija board and spirit communication collection. So, never been here before. About to just knock on the door. We got two cameras. It's kind of just funny looking because both are like, well, here we go.
Hi.
Hey! Colin.
Colin, pleasure. Brandon.
Peyton.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet
Welcome
you.
to the Mysterious Planchette Archives. All right, well, let's see. We'll just get started. So, the introductory room here is just my living room where I, put my feet up at night and where I like to surround myself with some choice items in various display cases here and there. A little bit of a mismatch here. I like to represent different aspects of my collection just here in sort of this opening case to give people an idea of what they're sort of getting into. And so you'll see, of course, quite a few of my specialties, the automatic writing planchette in here, as well as some related pseudo-scientific disciplines. I really like to collect galvanic items because a lot of planchette manufacturers promoted and utilized those beliefs, and galvanism is a related belief to mesmerism and animal magnetism, that the body has sort of a pervasive animalistic fluid that binds and penetrates everything, sort of like the Force in Star Wars, and that this can be properly manipulated by either trained individuals or by items. And a good example of that is this sort of quack healing device down here. It's a little hand cranked.
Wow.
Little electromagnet. It'll give you a good shock if you hold on to those terminals. And
So
then
what was that used for?
it was used for everything from rheumatism to aches and pains.
Wow. So it just shock you?
Yeah, it just shocks you. You could use the handles to apply it to different parts of the body.
Wow.
And sort of a related item too. We'll just crack some things open here. In the galvanism theory, so I'll point out some planchettes as we sort of get rolling here, but some will utilize essentially primitive battery technology, and that's what this little talisman is. So the most famous of these are the Boyd's batteries, but this is a Boyer French example. And you can see there's alternating metals, copper, brass, and nickel. And given a proper conductor, you could this actually constitutes a primitive battery. A voltaic pile is simply alternating rings of copper and nickel with usually saltwater felt pads in between them to create a current. So mixed with your body sweat, this technically creates a near impossible to detect current, but in theory, it actually does constitute a little miniature battery.
That's crazy.
And it's supposedly to cleanse and purify your blood. But you'll see this sort of primitive battery technology utilized in a lot of different things, and the beliefs pervasive at that time are going to sort of trickle down through spiritualism and find their way in the archaeology of a lot of these devices. This is a beauty here, recently added to the archive. This is the Mystic Wanderer by J.H. Singer. This is going to actually be a little bit later period than a lot of the automatic writing planchettes that we'll get to in a minute, but the Mystic Wanderer is going to come out in the wake of the Ouija board's debut in the 1890s, and you can really see a transition toward these beautifully lithographed board games and everything that it represents. And J.H. Singer produced some of the most beautiful historical games. All kinds of markers: the burning censer, the oracle, the griffin, the cabinet of curiosities, crocodile up there, the crone pointing out the indicator. So that is essentially a little boxed Ouija board. Some other weird stuff. This is a solar treatment device. This is actually from an osteopath in San Benito, Texas, and actually kept the museum's little placard from that. But what's neat about this one, I've got my favorite picture on top. It's a giant magnifying glass. This is just to treat lesions and skin cancer, essentially.
You just burn it off?
Yeah, and you see all these people with these different skin lesions on, and it just has sort of a violet filter, and I mean it's just a giant magnifying glass, and yeah, they would use these to sort of isolate the beam and just burn off everything. And I just love my the main picture. I mean, just look at the evil eye on that guy.
Ooh.
Bloody tear.
So
They burned his eye out, basically?
I have no idea what they did, but it looks
It's a little spooky.
Looks super not painful.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a selection of writing planchettes. Everything here is a British specimen. So, and most of these date from the 1920s and 1930s. Everything from the Two Worlds ball bearing planchette. There's an H.P. Gibson here, a couple of FHAers, as well as a Glevum Games. And so these kind of come from this turn of the century resurgence in the UK of an interest in planchettes, predominantly due to the 1901 to 1903 Cavendish case, where a medium sort of famously bilked this millionaire playboy out of the family fortune using planchette communications. And so that was this very high profile case. There's lots of illustrations in the paper, and there was a resurgence in interest in the planchette, again right on the heels of the Ouija board's popularity in America, which did not take well in the UK. The planchette, or the UK will be kind of the last holdout of the planchette.
Beautiful introduction.
A little tarot deck. I just got this a few days ago. What I love about this one is that there's actually a pendulum here representing the Hanged Man.
Wow.
Which I thought was a neat card.
Golem.
Oh, the golem.
Yeah, that's my Prague golem. I brought that back
Yes.
from Prague, where I went, and I've got a nice picture pointing up to the window. Yeah, the attic window, exactly. And I have some Vltava River clay from the banks. I actually went and found a clay bank and collected clay from the banks of the river.
Wow.
So I've got those in some vials. That was on my honeymoon, and my wife was absolutely thrilled that we were down at this park. Just digging up.
Sounds like
clay.
something we do, though. For sure.
When I first started collecting, I realized I always kind of had a little bit deeper love affair for automatic writing planchettes and for talking boards. And as I began to meet other collectors and come out of privacy and into the public life, I started to discover that the planchette wasn't really collected by anyone. So really in 2012 is when I went public, like, all right, this is going to be my thing. Planchettes are going to, be where I do this. And I'm similarly doing that with pendulums now. And pendulums, there are many talking board collectors. Few, if any, have any real planchettes to speak of. There are a couple of collectors that do have an interest in them. But similarly with the pendulum, it's not a well-respected item, and which is unusual in its close relation to the talking board.
Yeah.
They're not even cousins. They're siblings, really. And yet they just don't get a whole lot of play or respect in other collections. And so a lot of my more recent editions have been sort of plundering European auction houses for all of these various pendulums and such. A good example is this one here to the upper left. This is the Scripto pendulum. It's actually an automatic writing pendulum. And so, you would dip this in ink, and it would begin to produce writing and different shapes and pictures, and there were guides to interpreting the different shapes and everything that it would produce.
Wow.
And yeah, the spirit swami. You're actually looking at two different specimens here. This is the bottom cutout of a box, and here is the full item here, complete with its pendulum.
Wow. So what would it, like answer-wise, what would it give?
You know, this one is a little bit funky. So it can provide yes and no answers, and then it has these unusual sort of daily horoscopes, right? But you only really have 12 results, and I'm not sure. I mean, would you ask it someone's sign? It's funky, you know. And sometimes when you find these things produced for sort of a commercial market, and this was produced by a Lab or a Labie, which is the first company that produced the Magic 8 Ball.
Ah.
And so I don't have one of their specimens. It's funny that the older ones that even match this packaging tend to deform over the years. They take on kind of a teardrop shape from gravity. And so I haven't ever found one that I really wanted to add. But so really made kind of for the toy market. And so to me, they lose a little bit of spirit when, you know, they didn't even put any thought to communications on this one. But
it's a cool design though, for sure.
but we see that, you know, just in the manufacturing history as toy companies come in and sort of take over the industry from the originators.
Hasbro.
Yeah. You've got sort of a selection of Qiantung, which is a Asian fortune-telling device, marketed as Chinese fortune-telling sticks. And what you do is you shake these until one stick really, you know, sticks out and differentiates itself. In this case, I guess we'll pull that one. You would match the number to the little booklet inside. See what your fortune is. It's not always the top one. Oftentimes they sort of creep out from the bottom too, like that. You go, oh yeah, 58. That's your fortune.
I've never even heard of something like that. It's
Yeah,
crazy. That's cool.
A good visual here. Booklet.
Ooh. Huh. The oldest known.
Let's see, 58. Let's see, 58. What's our fortune? A day for fun and jollity. Good for all frivolity. Your fortune. Guard your tongue with everyone, or secrets you'll betray. That means to you both wealth and fame if you don't give them away. You have many friends, but there is one envious of your happiness. Wish for something better for your happiness.
Oh,
In bold.
it's kind of dark.
Yeah,
Someone's out there envying our happiness.
I guess so. Gee, really? Come on. And then, yeah, again, a lot of the things here in the house are sort of tangential. I don't collect a whole lot of fortune-telling devices, but, you know, you've got the El Caro. This one you would move 3 times in a figure-8 shape and then come to rest, and that would be your fortune, number 50, and you can read that on the inside of the box. It's like, envy. Your lovers are not true. Well, what are you going to do? They're so envious of our happiness here.
Yeah, right.
So what are you going to do? And some neat astrological devices. So here we have the Zodiacal Indicator. So write that here.
Wow.
And the baroscope, which is now functional. It's kind of complicated to use, but the baroscope was invented by this woman here, Belle Bart. And you would tune it into your birth date, to your sign, your birth date, and then depending on when you were trying to get a reading, usually for the upcoming month, you would place these tokens where the book tells you. And then when you get a match, one of these elemental matches here, when it actually hits one after you've placed it, when it points to it or makes contact with it, you get a match, and so you turn to all the relevant pages to read your fortune. It seems, again, not a believer in astrology, but it is a system. Whether you believe it or not is often irrelevant to me. In occultism, there's a system for believers that can be applied. You may believe that it's bunk, and that's okay, but at least it's a system and it's consistent. It has consistent rules.
Definitely.
And Belle Bart's astrological readings through this seem to at least be consistent with the rules of astrology. So I really greatly enjoy this device. And on my radar, because we had a press photograph of Belle Bart holding a much larger version of it, her personal version, and they sold a sort of a deluxe wooden version of this. And for a long time we thought it was a talking board. So it was on our radar, like, oh, we got to get one. And then I acquired this one in Astrological Device instead. But some other really terrible decision on this display case. Really dark wood with dark wood stuff. But yeah, some really old specimens here. An American Selkow Rider here. You have here what they call the Sternberg planchette, which we've identified through engravings because it looks just like a Jacques and Son planchette, but it has this beveled edge. It's sort of an unknown 1868 planchette we call the Daddy Longlegs because it's got these fantastic, great old legs.
So that planchette right there is from 1868.
This one is, yes.
Wow.
And this one might be from a little earlier, we're not sure. And then this is a real beauty. And we talked about galvanism. This is the Enchanting Medium. And the Enchanting Medium probably dates from after the Cavendish trial. It came out of the UK. It has a more traditional American shape, but what's really interesting about the Enchanting Medium is the galvanic alternating strips of copper and nickel, with the belief being that you would place your hands opposed on these finger rests and from there charge the device.
Ah. Cool.
And so, and it's also insulated with these sort of, wax or caps sort of in the wheel. So you see that on some devices. Many want to harness animal magnetism. Many and others want to insulate from it. This one really wants to harness it.
What's this cone?
That is a spirit trumpet. So. Let's talk spirit trumpets. Let's in the same way that an automatic writing planchette would harness automatic writing. You can automatic write without a planchette. You can just use your hand and you would sort of go into a trance and this is a technique even modern psychologists use with their subjects to often tap into the subconscious mind to get information hidden there. In the same way that the planchette harnesses that mode of spirit communication, or that mode of mediumship, so too does the spirit trumpet harness what we would call voice mediumship or trance mediumship. And it enables the medium to transmit the whispered voices of spirits from trance and transmit that across the table. It was often believed that the spirits didn't have what I call the ectoplasmic fortitude to really properly manipulate your vocals in a way that you could speak out to a room. It manifested as a whisper, and so they often needed to be amplified with these. And it also probably doesn't hurt that you can transmit your voice, a few feet away using one of these things, and to an individual as well. Houdini, Dunninger, and a lot of the great expose magicians make a really big deal out of spirit trumpets, and so they often show up in the collections of magic collectors and such as a result, because they become sort of a magic prop over the years. Invented in 1853 by a young medium by the name of Nim Koons. Jonathan Koons was the father and principal medium for the Koons family, which was a large family out of Athens County, Ohio, in the middle of nowhere. No offense to any Athenians that are watching, but it's still in the middle of nowhere. Definitely. I visited there after a 4-year search trying to find the ruins location of the original Koons spirit room. And what this is, what the story essentially is Jonathan Koons is a great skeptic whose 12-year-old daughter Felinia passes away. She's much beloved, and she passes away, and he becomes very embittered towards some of the local clergy because he can find no clergyman to preside over her funeral. He himself is an atheist and his family doesn't belong to any other congregation. So he sends his neighbor out to try to find essentially a deacon to come say mass over her grave, and none of them will because they're not contributing tithing members of other. So he kind of goes on the warpath after this, and one of his targets was a medium that was operating there in Ohio, and he went to her with the intention of debunking her and kind of publicly shaming her, but he receives a message from her that in fact he is the world's greatest spirit medium. And he takes this to heart for whatever reason, and he begins practicing automatic writing and trance mediumship at his home. And the spirits give him a set of instructions, and those instructions are for the construction of what they call a spiritual machine. And it, again, another callback to galvanism, essentially they tasked him, they gave him blueprints for essentially a giant tabletop battery. It has all these alternating plates of copper and nickel, these dove-shaped plates, all these, this like framework with these glass knobs and contraptions and wires and all kinds of insulators and weird glass knobs and bells and things all over this table. And the purpose of this machine was to charge the atmosphere of the room to allow the spirits to manifest. Ooh. Now, before that, seances were trance mediumship. You would go and someone would go into a trance and speak with the spirits, or rapping mediumship in the style of the Fox sisters, which gets its birth in 1848. And in that case, you'd go listen to a medium and they would produce, raps and knocks to communicate in a binary manner with the spirits. This is the first time that spirits will actually manifest physically. And believe that is the first place that they manifest physically. And so tens of thousands of people flock to this spirit room that was specially built to house this spiritual battery. And they see these glow-in-the-dark manifestations, glowing hands that write out messages from beyond, faces, sometimes little miniature forms. They always get these little mini Native Americans they see. But the glowing hands, typically a seance there would begin with Jonathan Goons playing on his fiddle, and the room was festooned, and we're talking just like a 14 by 14 foot little log cabin, but totally dark. The table, the weird battery table sits at the head of the room. He'd begin playing his fiddle, and then these drums would sound to announce the spirit guide, King 1. And that would later become John King, the famous buccaneer. The spirits would arrive, and they would begin taking up the instruments that were hanging all about the room and begin playing along to Jonathan Combs' spirit fiddle. And then that would cease. The communications would begin. The glowing hands would manifest, write messages to the sitters. They could ask questions of the spirits, and they would communicate through the invention of the young boy medium Nim, which was the spirit trumpet. So this would float around the room, sometimes with some water-soaked phosphorus sandpaper, which is what they used to provide sort of a dull glow in the room. And so people would see this floating around and tapping on the head and, conveying messages to them. And so that's the birth of the spirit trumpet, and the news of that sort of spreads virally, and mediums begin sort of giving up rapping mediumship in favor of trance mediumship. Wow. Through the use of the spirit trumpet. And these will be popular well into the 1920s, and then go into sort of a decline with the exposure of Houdini. So a spirit slate is a device used by automatic writing mediums to record their automatic writings in lieu of quill and paper. And usually sitters would just bring their own school slate. That way it was sort of a means of disarming any fraudulent activity. How it couldn't be rigged or gaffed in any way if you're bringing your own. And so you would show up at a seance with a spirit slate, and typically, again, the belief was, just as Coons had started with the Coons spirit room, that the spirits could only manifest in darkness. So typically either there would be a cover put over the spirit slate, or the medium would throw it under the table. You would hear this mysterious writing, and then it would be covered in mysterious scribbles. And we actually, this is an extraordinarily rare item. We have in the archive a preserved 1920s Fred Evans spirit slate with the writing intact.
Yeah.
This was preserved by the Society of Progressive Spiritualists in San Francisco. It was produced on April 17th, 1927 by Fred Evans, who is a sort of a famous, some of his work here, famous slate writer. You see there's all kinds of messages to different people. That is a treasure.
Yeah, that's insane. Definitely glad we got that.
We're moving to my kids' room now, in the bathroom here. So this was actually the original collection room, and it was our guest bedroom. And this is more like what the living room will eventually look like. But eventually, a lot of these sort of prints and photographs that you see, I have just drawers and drawers full of this stuff that needs to be framed and displayed. And a lot of historical documents and blueprints of these devices and stuff like that. So here's the Fox Cottage. It burned down in the 1850s, but there's a photograph of it from that period when it was actually moved from Hydesville, New York. So this is literally the house where spiritualism was born. This is where the Fox sisters, Kate and Maggie, began to experience strange rappings and knockings and establish communication with the other side. The home was later moved to Lilydale, New York, the famous town that talks to the dead, but burned, unfortunately, in the 1950s.
So do you ever have paranormal activity here in the house, having all these artifacts?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. Other than my mother-in-law freaking out, I've never experienced anything personally.
Interesting.
Which is often a good counter. It just never fails, particularly at a paranormal event. I do speak at those relatively often. I'll be sitting at the table, we'll have a little spread of Ouija boards, and somebody will walk by and say, those things are, open up, you're opening doors you can't close. Exactly. It's a portal to beyond. And you go, well, that's funny because, I literally probably have 250 of them sitting in my garage right now. And so far it hasn't burned down and, portals haven't opened up. And, I've got 5 just right here. So, and it's funny, Talking Board Historical Society director Rick Schreck, who is a good friend of mine, and I'm always deeply entertained because his backstory on why he began collecting talking boards is because he wanted to hunt his home and see if there was anything behind it. He was like, hell, if a portal to hell is going to open up, I want it to happen right here in New Jersey. And so I've always given him major kudos for that. When he does interviews, that's his backstory, and it's pretty cool. And
but nothing really happens though.
Yeah, not to date. Let's not let it happen now.
Yeah, right.
Don't bring anything with you. This paper one, this is the Highest Sprite board by Don Dickerson. Don Dickerson is a famous American restaurateur and club owner. And he consulted the Ouija board daily. I mean, he's a historical figure. He was a partner with Bob Hope and Errol Flynn and some different restaurants and everything. And he consulted the board daily. I actually own his Ouija board archives. He took notes in all of his notebooks and scraps of paper and even the backs of some of those paper talking boards and everything. And so his family saw fit to relinquish those archives to me, and we are currently in the process of preserving those, trying to get them all digitized and online. I do a lot of preservation work, predominantly with the International Association for the Preservation of Spiritualist and Occult Periodicals. We are sort of at the forefront of guerrilla preservation for spiritualist and occult documents. We raid libraries wherever we can and spiritualist churches and archives that have these collections and just digitize anything we can get our hands on. And to date, we have over 3 million pages of digitized content that we all offer for free on our website and mirror everywhere. It's like the great lost archive of spiritualist stuff because these papers are just falling apart and deteriorating. They were printed on cheap acidic paper, and libraries all over the country are tossing these documents out like trash, and so it's erasing its time. We literally have libraries that would rather throw these things away than donate them. We have a director who is actually an eminent scholar at his library, And they noticed that all these old scientific journals were being thrown. They were walking by and literally seeing them in the library dumpster. So they started taking them back to their offices to preserve them. And one day they found a lock on the dumpster. So they went in and asked the librarian, like, what's going on? We're trying to get these things. And they were told, if you dare touch our trash again, we will blackball you from every library in this country. Don't mess with us. That is our job. And they would literally rather see those things go to the land for whatever inexplicable reason. And in some cases, there are libraries. I mean, we have literally had directors go to libraries and find these things in their trash.
That's
and,
insane.
The only known copies of newspapers and periodicals.
Why?
And stuff.
Why do you think?
No. I don't know if it's that they think this is a dead branch of research history or what. I just don't know.
It's bizarre.
It's bizarre. It's perplexing. So yeah, a few cool treasures in this case here. Again, another sort of mishmash, but we have here 3 extraordinarily rare items. I think we've got about 13 existing, and I own 4 or 5 of the known survivors. These are Hudson Tuttle psychographs. Hudson Tuttle was a famous spiritualist out of Berlin Heights, Ohio. He was a horse breeder and an early proponent of evolutionary theory that Darwin actually quotes in some of his work. And he's just this quaint, curious fellow that produced what he called his psychograph or dial planchette. And so this is one of the few surviving Tuttle psychographs. And it's much like a Ouija board. It predates the Ouija board by probably 10 years or so. These first start showing up in the 1880s. But it's all one piece. There's no planchette. It just has a rotating dial, little ball bearing powered rotating dial, and it would spell out messages. All that's fun and all, but you haven't even seen the real collection yet.
Uh-oh.
Just get wet for a second.
Oh my god.
This is awesome.
This is the collection.
I love the smell in here.
Yeah.
What does it smell like? I can't smell it anymore.
It's like,
Old.
Yeah.
yeah, kind of like,
Basically.
We'll kind of start over in that corner, and yeah, we'll fizzle out over here at some point.
thank you so much for doing this, by the way. This is like
Pleasure.
so cool to see.
My name is Brandon Hodge. I'm sitting in the middle of my Mysterious Planchette archive, named after my website, mysteriousplanchet.com, which promotes my research and history into these fascinating devices, predominantly the automatic writing planchette, but also talking boards and other spirit communication apparatus. I'm also a director for the Talking Board Historical Society, where I serve as the official historian, and I'm a preservationist and board member of the International Association for the Preservation of Spiritualist and Occult Periodicals.
So I mentioned how 1853 is really a banner year in spirit communication devices. By 1853, we're about 5 years into spiritualism from its birth with the Fox sisters. And you can see in the literature that it really begins, rapping mediumship in particular really starts to take its toll on seance sitters. Imagine your mode of communication is either rap once for yes or twice for no, or alphabet calling, where you call out the alphabet one letter at a time. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N. N. Okay, write down N. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Okay, write down I. I mean, that's literally how you're communicating. But at the same time, you have people publishing entire novels of work that they claim that they are receiving from the spirits through this. But you have skeptics, my favorite probably being Reverend Mattinson, who comes out with a book in, I believe, 1854, that seeks to debunk spiritualism by he and his friend doing very simple timed experiments where they spell out known messages to one another through spirit rapping, and they find out you can only produce about 240 characters an hour. That's less than 2 tweets in 1 hour. And so he used that to basically, hey, we knew what we were spelling out. We did it as fast as we could. And there's no way you're producing entire novels worth of this stuff.
No.
And so, but you can see it even among believers that it's wearing down on them. It's becoming tedious. And so there are methods created to expedite spirit communication. And the first of them is probably going to be Adolphus Vogner. Wagner is in Berlin. He's a music conductor, not the famous music composer, but he's a conductor, and he produces what we call Wagner's psychograph. And it is a weird crisscrossed mechanism. It's a psychograph, or a pantograph is a writing duplication machine. It has these crisscrossed arms, and you might have had one as a kid. You kind of draw on something, and there's these crisscross arms that move, and then they duplicate the writing, either larger or smaller depending on how it's set. And he modified one of these items into, essentially it has these plates on top of it. Everyone would place their hands on it, and it would move like we're used to the movements of the Ouija board. In this age, you also have the popularity of table tipping. And a table tipping seance just involves putting your hands on the kitchen table. No one knows where this concept was really invented or discovered, but through the power of the subconscious mind, if you're a skeptic, or the power of the spirits, if you're a believer, placing your hands upon the table, you and a group of people would eventually lead to mysterious movements. And you could ask the table questions, yes or no. Or spell out the alphabet with it, and it would rap the different messages. And so that was a popular form of sort of do-it-yourself mediumship that is going to really come to the fore about 1852, 1853. By 1853, news of this has crossed over into Europe and becomes extraordinarily, huge parlor fad. Just one of these things, everybody's doing it. So I have this massive collection of illustrations from that era where it's really the first great craze of the sort of do-it-yourself, hands-on mediumship for the home. But even then, the table wrapping out communications is tedious. So you have the inventors like Wagner. Some inventors take advantage of the actual table movements. You have, here in America, you have Isaac Pease. He creates what he calls his spiritual telegraph dial. It's a little tabletop device. It's like a little angled cigar box with a dial on it, kind of like the Tuttle psychograph. Which, here's another one. Here. And I love this one. It's got this cool leatherette. But if you can imagine this on a little angled box, right? And a cord tied to it. And then you would throw this weight, or a pulley with a weight maybe to a nearby chair, and as the table tipped back and forth, this thing would move and spell out communications. And so another alphabetic spelling apparatus. Wagner in Berlin has competition from this guy named Daniel Ornag, who creates another tabletop device that takes advantage of the tipping table to spell out messages. And this is going to be sort of an expedited means of spirit communication. You also, in these years, have other skeptics, my favorite being Dr. Robert Hare. Dr. Hare is one of America's preeminent scientists. He's sort of a pop culture guy in the way that Stephen Hawking or Neil deGrasse Tyson is. He's just one of these very well-known public scientists. He has the chair at the University of Philadelphia, or is the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And he's a chemist in an age where chemistry is king before physics sort of takes over. And he retires his chair and decides that he is going to debunk spiritualism. He's going to use his scientific acumen and theories to essentially debunk spiritualism. First, he creates a series of tables that roll in weird ways to try to debunk table tipping, to show that it's the user's own muscular power unconsciously used that's driving the table. And then he creates a series of traveling devices that he calls his spiritoscopes. And his spiritoscopes, again, are these tabletop devices, these alphabetic spelling devices. And one has survived to the modern day. It
It is the oldest spirit communication device known to have survived by 15 years or so, predating anything in any other collection, museum or otherwise. And it's right there.
Wow.
The illustration that you see framed below is actually from Dr. Robert Hare's book, Spiritualism Scientifically Demonstrated, because, note that title, Spiritualism Scientifically Demonstrated, not debunked. Because through the use of that device in the hands of some very prominent mediums, he becomes convinced that the communications he's receiving are legitimate. And he comes out on the side in favor of spiritualism. And he goes public with it. And this is the equivalent of Neil deGrasse Tyson going on Cosmos and saying, well, we've been doing a lot of math and we've got these, equations about the half-life of carbon, and hey, it turns out that we can actually prove heaven exists, God is real, and he's speaking to us. And so that's one of Robert Hare's spiritoscopes there. Again, the illustration from his book is framed below.
Quick question before we get back into it. Do you actually use any of these Ouija boards ever?
I don't. I have had a Ouija experience. I talked about the obelisk in the middle of it, but I have had a convincing Ouija experience. Just received hours of communications with multiple users in the Tilly house in Gettysburg. It's really the only time I've used it effectively. I've used it a few times here and there, but not a believer. I'm a skeptic at heart, but I'm not a hard skeptic. Not an aggressive skeptic. I want to believe, and if all this turned out to have something other to it that wasn't explainable by science, I'd be totally cool with that. But I don't spend a lot of time. It's the history and the research of it that really gets me. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about,
What happened in Gettysburg? Can you kind of...
It was just we were in Gettysburg. We were at the Tilly house, which is sort of famously haunted. It was used as a battlefield triage after the Battle of Gettysburg. And it is a bed and breakfast now, but sort of famously haunted. It was a boarding house at the time, if I remember correctly. But it's said to, have all sorts of activity there. And so I was lecturing at a paranormal conference there. And as part of my hosting duties, I guess being a guest, I was expected to be sort of a, pseudo-celebrity host at one of these things. So myself and Robert Murch, talking board collector, Jeff Belanger, we all packed up and went, and Bob and I, again, not normally being in the paranormal field with all this other modern equipment, decided we'd just bring along a talking board, and we tossed it on the table downstairs and invited people to start using it. And we received about 4 hours worth of communications. I mean, it was everyone taking turns, trusted people, no shenanigans. Very light touches on the planchette, and that thing was just gliding all over the board. And I remember, memory serves, we were talking to someone who claimed to be a nurse there that tended to the soldiers. She had died 3 years later, I believe in 1868. Her husband, she said that her husband was there. She named other entities in the room. Others didn't want to be named. I remember there was some black dark shadow entity that she discussed that didn't want to take part in the proceedings, and a lot of biographical information and stuff, which I remember we recorded, not someone who was going to research, see if there was anything to it.
And then you used the Ovilus.
Well, I didn't use it. There was an experience there where we were using it. We heard a sort of a boom and a crash, a few, somewhere outside, and a few men, and we hear man yelling, and a few minutes later the police lights started lighting up the front room and everything as the EMS showed up. And one of the paranormalists come down the stairs, and they have one of the Ovilus little voice, one of the word bank boxes,
And it was so bizarre because it was saying stairs, glass, hurt, help, glass, stairs. Like, what is that? And we go out and we find out from the officers outside that an elderly man had taken a tumble down the stairs and had shoved his body through a plate glass window and was bleeding all over the place, and thus they had been called. And so that was pretty freaky to witness, because there's just this random word bank, there's nothing to really manipulate on there, and all these keywords to that incident were popping up. So yeah, there's something to that, right? Not sure what the technology behind those is, but I witnessed it. It was legit. Don't have any explanation for that one.
Just interesting.
So in 1853, you have the Vogner psychograph, the Ornoga manulector, the Isaac Pease telegraph dial here in the States. And in Paris, you have the automatic writing planchette. Like the other devices, the automatic writing planchette is suggested by the spirits to a chamber, a seance circle in Paris. And it was on June 10th, 1853, and essentially they are doing table tipping seances, and they're experiencing the table. At one point, they actually try to tie a pencil to a table leg, probably a little, something like this, one of these little Empire three-legged things. And they're trying to get it to write out messages, and the spirits actually suggest to them through table tipping, go to the next room, fetch a basket from the mantle, bring it back in here, attach a pencil to it, place your hands on the basket, and we will write for you. And so they do this, and at that moment, the automatic writing planchette is essentially born. Within just a few months, we have evidence they are being produced by cabinet makers in Paris. So by 1854, we have our first early advertisements for essentially a cottage industry for what will evolve into a wooden board. And so planchette means little plank, or little piece of wood, and that's essentially what it is. The planchette is a two-wheeled device. It usually has two rear casters, a thin board of wood, either heart or shield shaped, and then its third leg, as it were, would be a pencil. So a pencil would go through. This one is missing its pencil aperture, but a pencil would go through here. You'd balance it out. Everyone places their hands on the device. Certainly I should grab a better prop, so. There you go, Banks Williams. Sorry, I'm just going to destroy your editing content.
No, let's destroy away.
Here's a shield-shaped American device. This is the William Burgum planchette. We know its previous owner because his name is stamped on it. This is a Bangs Williams insulated planchette from the 1850s, and I'm sorry, from the 1860s. And again, two wheels to allow movement and roll around the table, and a pencil is the third wheel. So the item would be placed on a piece of butcher paper, foolscap paper, and then everyone would place their hands on it, and it would begin to move around and produce automatic writing script. And so the planchette is born. It remains a local phenomenon in Paris for several years. In 1858, 1859, two Americans, Dr. H.F. Gardner and famous politician Robert Dale Owen. Robert Dale Owen has been serving as a sort of an ambassador in Italy. He's relieved of that post. He's returning to America. He takes a tour with his friend Dr. Gardner. They travel through Italy. They travel to France to witness the tomb writings of Baron Goldenstub, who was essentially putting paper and pen on tombs, leaving and then coming back, and there would be spirit writing on them. And while there, they witness automatic writing planchette seances, and they acquire 6 devices and bring them first to London and then into America. And by 1860, the first American automatic writing planchettes are being produced in Boston, where they landed. They gave a copy to a Boston bookseller. Evidence seems to suggest it was probably J.W. Cottrell, and he produces what's called his Boston planchette. I like this one over here. And the Boston planchette. What's curious about it is the label. This label has been partially cut off. You can just make out, it says from the original pattern, first manufactured in 1860. And so J.W. Cottrell here. So this is what we believe to be one of the earliest Boston planchette designs. There are a few. There's one more traditionally heart-shaped. All we know is that this Boston bookseller produced 60 items. I'm sorry, he produced about 50 of them in 1860, and then put them for sale at his Boston bookstore, and they languished. They just didn't sell. And they sat there for many years until he got a little help from the press. And I actually have, just happens to be handy, because I just finally acquired a copy of it after a search of many years. He gets a little help from the press in an article called Planchette in the Once a Week edition, the October 26, 1867 edition of Once a Week. This is a British publication. And this, you can see there's multiple pages there. It tells a very sensational story of an American tourist in Scotland with some British friends who bring along a planchette, which was being manufactured in the UK by that time, particularly by Thomas Welton. And it's a sensational story of the crazy communications they received through the planchette. It includes some illustrations. The earliest known illustration of a planchette is literally right there on that piece of paper. And how to make one, and the planchette in use. And this article gets printed and reprinted over and over and over. It goes viral, essentially. It's reprinted here in the States. And the article is so good at sensationalizing the planchette that it's reprinted well up into the 1920s and put it in planchette boxes. And so, as a result of this late 1867 article, by early 1868 it had spread and been reprinted, and by the holiday season 1868 the planchette has become the must-have gift item of the season. It's on everyone's lips. It's in every stationer worth their salt anywhere in the US. They just proliferate in the newspapers. The planchette goes viral. It becomes the yo-yo. It becomes the hula hoop. It becomes the Cabbage Patch doll, the Furby of the year. And so booksellers race now to produce these arcane occult devices in really what will be sort of the second great craze of spirit community, sort of do-it-yourself mediumship, the first being table tipping 15 years previously. And so Cottrell and others are armed and ready to begin producing these devices, and most of the spread here includes devices from that initial explosion. So you've got J.W. Cottrell, of course, several specimens of Cottrell's Boston planchette and assorted variations. You've got J.W. Pitcher, which produces a few really strange items, strangely shaped items, as well as a clone of what I call a Kirby clone. And because this one takes the same shape as a Kirby and Company planchette, which is right here, the first one I had. Kirby and Company really are going to be sort of the undisputed kings of the planchette. They were a New York bookseller, and they, for whatever reason, their name sort of becomes synonymous with the planchette. They have sheet music that is dedicated to them, and Kirby's planchette. They claim, depending on the source you read, there's two different quotes that they sold either 35,000 or 200,000 in the Christmas gift season alone that year. And Kirby and Company also was well known for a few other innovations in the planchette, and that is they had 3 wooden variations, which are represented here, and they had
They're more rare. Number 3, India rubber planchette is how they marketed this. It's actually not India rubber, it's ebonite, which is one of the earliest forms of manufactured plastic. And given that we know Goodyear actually produced these rubber wheels on this model, there's a good chance that this was produced at the early Goodyear plant for the company. And
That's interesting.
but really the apex of automatic writing planchette technology would come with their number 4, which was introduced late in the craze, and it is their plate glass planchette, so manufactured so that you could see through it. And again, like Goodyear being the earliest contender to probably for producing their ebonite planchette, we know from a single newspaper announcement that they teamed up with an early claimant to sort of the planchette manufacturing crown, this Portland, Maine glazier, glass manufacturer named C.H. Farley actually steps forward in the press and says, "Hey, I was selling planchettes years before you guys." And even though his claims still don't predate Cottrell's claims, but whatever. And actually have not only I have C.H. Farley's card here, his business card, Nautical Instruments, with a picture of his factory, but I have his eyeglasses as well. And being a glazier, and his family owned the C.H. Farley Glass Works well into, I believe, the 1950s. There's a good chance that the partnership he announced with Kirby, which is probably what's responsible for creating that. So I've got a few cool artifacts of that guy. And everything blows up from there. So 1868 just becomes the year of the planchette. And you see a lot of devices begin to spring up in the 70s and 80s that will try to solve what I call the curious leapfrog. And the curious leapfrog is the concept that we already had alphabetic spelling devices. We already have wrapping mediums using alphabet boards to point out letters instead of calling out the alphabet. They would point with a pencil, but they don't quite put those two together. You have some attempts in the 1870s. Every once in a while, you'll see an illustration when you're doing your research, and you're like, oh, well, somebody thought to put the rolling planchette and an alphabet board together, and it doesn't stick. In the 1880s, Tuttle comes up with his alphabetic spelling device. In the 1880s, this doesn't become popular. This caters to spiritualists. It's advertised mostly just to them. But really, the planchette is going to remain king. There'll be resurgences of its popularity in the 1870s, a little blip here, a little blip there in the 1880s. But really, in 1886 is the banner year that will set up the next big explosion in spirit communication apparatus. Grab this. That's not the right planchette. Oh, there's one. And so in 1886, you have a group of spiritualists, again in Ohio. There are so many things going on in Ohio, so many things invented in this hotbed of spiritualism. And you have an article that comes out that called The New Planchette. What's interesting about this article is it's illustrated, and it's illustrated with what will become a few years from there, the Ouija board. They call it a talking board or the new planchette, and it's essentially very simple. It's a callback to the earliest alphabet cards that mediums would point to during alphabet calling. So it has the alphabet, it has numbers, typically a binary yes and no question, and it's paired with essentially a legged planchette minus the pencil. And this article debuts in 1886, and again, kind of goes viral. And but you don't see any sort of industry pop up around it. It's easy enough to have a board like this produced. And there is one man that produces these, and we know this article was reprinted in the Baltimore Sun.
And we know that the Baltimore Sun was distributed in Chestertown, Maryland. And there are two men there, E.C. Riche and Charles Kennard. And Charles Kennard and E.C. Riche partner together, inspired by this idea. Of course, they will later claim that, Kennard will later claim that he invented the talking board using a bread cutting board and a teacup and a spoon, and he was sort of experimenting with this teacup, that his mother had been a planchette user, and he was inspired to pair the mysterious movements of this teacup and onto this printed board. The fact is, he said he invented it in his kitchen. As I'm fond of saying, he probably invented it in the bathroom, on the toilet, reading the newspaper, because we know that the very same year, illustrated articles were showing up on his front doorstep showing the talking board. So he and a local cabinet and coffin maker named E.C. Riche, he essentially commissions E.C. Riche to manufacture the first boards that will become Ouija. There's no name at that point. They are debuted at a local party. They're kind of a local hit. They manufacture some. Charles Kennard wants to produce more and sort of make a business of it. It's maybe a little funny in telling that he's actually a fertilizer salesman, so he's already shoveling manure for a living, and decides that he's going to take this idea with him to Baltimore, where he partners up with some Freemasons there. He was a Freemason himself. He partners up with some fraternal brethren there, and the Kennard Novelty Company is born. The board was still unnamed until one night he and some of the founders of the company were performing with the patentee. One of the business partners would go on to be the patentee of the device, Elijah Bond. His sister-in-law is at the table. So the group considered her a strong medium, and she is at play with an early prototype of the board, and they as yet have no name for it. They ask it what it would like to be called, and the planchette spells out Ouija, and they ask the board what it means, and it spells out good luck. And this is the definitive account of how the Ouija board got its name. Recently, myself and some of the other directors of the Talking Board Historical Society unveiled a monument at the grave of Helen Peters, sort of commemorating her being the mother of the Ouija board, the one who gave it its iconic, famous name.
It was here in 1890 at 529 North Charles Street here in Baltimore where Elijah Bond, the original patent owner of the Ouija board, supposedly got the inspiration for the name Ouija from a board session he had in this building. It used to serve as a boarding house, and he actually lived here back in the day. And there's a plaque inside commemorating that event to this day. Let's go take a look.
No. I had 20. Give me yeah. Give me 2. What else you got? Green double. Give me 2.
In a twist of fate, the woman working at the counter doesn't even know that it's the store where the Ouija board was named.
But the fact is, it was a device already in use for 4 years at that point. But somehow her and Elijah Bond were able to convince the patent office to grant them a patent on something that should not have been patentable. And as the story goes, the man's name, which was unknown to them, was the board spelled out the man's name, and he was convinced of the game's effectiveness and granted their patent. And so they got a lock on it, and the famous Ouija was produced by the Kennard Novelty Company. And this is an original Kennard board and planchette. You can see this one is a rare one that actually has the directions on the bottom of the planchette. And you can see here it's got the patented stamp on the back. We always look for February 10th, 1891 is when the patent was secured.
Wow.
And that is when the original Kenner Novelty Company talking about words. The felt missing from the...
It's pretty creaky.
Yeah. But, and we've always, theorized that, the unusual shape of the planchette was probably to differentiate it from any patent claims that might come along from previous planchette manufacturers that they might have held. But that's just a theory, maybe a good guess. But
So, 1891, the Ouija goes public and becomes really the third great craze of the spirit communication device era. The tipping tables being the first, automatic writing planchette being the second, and the talking board being the third. The planchette, of course, will ride the coattails of Ouija's success for a few phases. Really, by the 1920s, though, the planchette is only hanging on in the UK, and the talking board is taken over, and it will enjoy its success, really peaking out probably in the 1920s, but into the 1930s and 40s and beyond. The evolution of spirit communication devices then will largely be confined, as far as physical devices will in many ways cease with the Ouija. It will become sort of the penultimate, most recognizable form of spirit communication, as far as do-it-yourself mediumship. But there will be other attempts. There will, of course, be EVP with the invention of radio. Will become sort of the new incarnation, the new evolution of trance mediumship. But allowing the spirits to speak through the radio instead. And there'll be advances, right up to the modern day with devices such as the, meters and obelisk and everything else. But really, the Ouija will cap off the great age of physical communication devices, with alphabetic spelling finally coming full circle to the earliest forms of alphabet calling, with spirit rapping and table tipping mediumship. So all this trouble just to go back to flashlight seances.
Yeah, right. It's crazy. Full circle for sure. So, do you think that there is any sort of actual spiritual base to any of these devices? Like they actually do make it easier to communicate with these spirits, or?
I mean, I'm certainly not such a hard skeptic to believe that if someone believes they are in tune with something, that these devices will facilitate that communication. I have no doubt that in the hands of believers that they'll be effective in that regard. To me, it's no less wondrous whether you are a believer who believes the spirits are manipulating the device, or whether you believe it's ideomotor response and that you're tapping into your subconscious. I find it no less miraculous that individuals are able to collectively produce messages with these devices and others of things that they may not otherwise know. I find that mental phenomenon no less fascinating than if the spirits themselves were real.
And what would you say to people who say that, like we were talking about earlier, like Ouija boards are satanic and evil, and that, I know that started kind of because of The Exorcist.
Right. Well, a lot of people, publicly and privately certainly are quick to dole out a bit of shame to us Ouija collectors, because they think we're going to help facilitate portals to hell. In my experience, I've never seen a planchette fly across the room. I've never seen someone get stabbed in the eye or get bloody from one, although the pins can be sharp on some of those planchettes, so do be careful, folks. But it's a matter of history and research. And even from the earliest days, we do see claims of diabolical influence. I have literature from 1854, right after the birth of planchettes, where there's this guy who's describing his different collection of planchettes and different spirit guides that are attached to each, and he recounts this story of how one of his planchettes gets taken over by the devil, and it develops Tourette's. It starts cussing at him and telling him he's in burning hell and everything. But then in between the communications, his other spirit guide attached to it is being like, use
other board. Use white planchette. So he does. He gets the other board. And she's like, woo, listen, it's your varnish. You got to revarnish that other board. It's got the devil in it. You know, just don't use it. You revarnish it. She gives him instructions, and he does. He revarnishes, and he uses it. And she's like, oh, much better, much better. You know, the devil's gone. So even from the earliest use of these devices, we have those conceptions. You certainly have those from the pulpit claiming that they're diabolically influenced, but it is not the pervasive belief. It's not the overwhelming belief. And you can see it. You can track it statistically. You can see it in Google Ngrams, these word correlations. It's just science. You know, you've got a written record. You can see the word correlations. You can watch it spike. You can watch the belief shift in the wake of The Exorcist. And we have verifiable evidence to show that. And again, it maybe isn't necessarily the most definitive proof, but something did change. You go from popular sheet music celebrating the Ouija, you go to Norman Rockwell painting the Ouija for the Saturday Evening Post in the 1920s. It's a popular, fun pastime. You know, even just a few years before The Exorcist, you certainly, you know, you've got Lee Jean ads and stuff talking about, you know, just, you know, it tapped into the sort of, you know, the New Age era and everything. And it was fun and funky and a little bit creepy maybe, but not really. It was mostly just fun and quirky. But you really see that shift, and it's been hard to shake. You know, you go to a paranormal convention, you've got people who don't want to even be within sight of any of these. And, you know, I think there is something to our subconscious minds. You know, for example, I can pull an artifact out and I can tell when it's been well used. And I think maybe our brains pick up on that. You know, if I really study it closely, you know, if you pick up an old board and it's really, the varnish is really worn here and there, some people will, you know, oh my God, this is a powerful board. Well, it got used a lot. You can at least tell that. And you can see when the fingers wear down the planchettes, when the felt's worn down. I think our brains are intuitive enough to pick up on those subtle clues and assign certain significance to them that, you know, we might not otherwise. But in any case, I think it's amazing nonetheless, whether you attribute it to spirits, whether you attribute it to our own subconscious mind at work. It's pretty cool. Something I enjoy. It's the history of it. I enjoy chasing, and it's a story I enjoy telling.
So how did you get into doing all of this also?
I got into this, so in 1996 I moved to Austin. My first and really only job in Austin before I went to business for myself was at a place called Lone Star Illusions, which was a gift shop in Barton Creek Square Mall and had a magic counter. And I was the new guy, so everybody had to learn all these magic tricks, and they were the cheapest little dinkiest things. And I started taking the videos we sold home and learning the card tricks on them and performing to sell the videos. And I started selling a lot of the videos because I was performing the card tricks. So then the manager gave me the booklet, and I started ordering all the magic, and I ended up becoming the manager of that place within a few years. But as part of that, I got tired of card tricks pretty quick, and I fell in with sort of a subgenre of magic performance called bizarre magic. And it's a little more popular now than it was then, but bizarre magic, there were these guys, Doc Hillard and Tony Andruzzi, who were these famous performers who were doing occult and macabre themes, typically in close-up settings. And there was sort of a rebirth of that, largely in part due to my friend Christian Chelman's book, Capricornian Tales. And the reason that was so influential was he took legitimate antiques that he had acquired from European flea markets and made magic out of them. And so bizarre magic tended to be very storytelling based and very intimate, and the effects weren't gotcha and flashy typically. And so I took this to heart and I began to develop a haunted antiques show in an age where the concept of haunted antiques was not a thing. It was not, you didn't have results for haunted doll on eBay in 96, 97. And I decided as props for this performance, I developed a seance-like show where I would display different items. I had an antique gaffed fiddle that was said to be Jonathan Kuhn's seance fiddle, which I later discovered actually still exists in his family. They actually still have his fiddle. And I acquired my first talking boards and planchettes as antiques, haunted antiques, to be part of that show. And they move mysteriously and spell out messages. And I gave up performing not long after that show really got written and debuted, but the acquisition stayed. And my very first planchette is that one there. I believe I acquired that in 97. And it just, the research stayed, and the acquisition, the collecting stayed. I was researching seance history for my routine, essentially. And so I just kept that ball rolling, even though it wasn't contributing to performance. Here I am.
Crazy how that works out.
Yeah.
Out of all these objects that you've got, here in storage, whatnot, are there any specific items that you think might actually be haunted? Like, that might have some sort of not a presence necessarily, but some sort of a strange feeling when you're with them, or...
I do have one planchette in the collection that if it's going to carry any spirits with it, this would definitely be the one. It was acquired from a seance circle that was performing seances during the Second World War in the UK, during, when the UK was being bombed and everything. And this planchette produced messages, it was said, from the spirits of deceased soldiers. And the seance circle would then take it upon themselves to communicate these messages from beyond to the surviving members of these families, who were often quite surprised to suddenly get these letters from the seance group saying, "We're sorry, but your son was killed in action and he has this to say." And I acquired the planchette from the son of one of the mediums of that circle. And it is a grand old, worn, well-used and well-loved planchette, and the son was nice enough to write me a letter of the story and the account behind it. And that one certainly has a certain feel to it. Now, what you want to attribute that to, the fact that it's well-worn and well-used, I leave that to others to decide, but it certainly has a special place in the collection because of that history.
Do you have that somewhere in the house?
No, I don't, unfortunately. That one is packed up off-site. It belongs on that hook right there, and so many of my UK planchettes are packed away. Let's see if there's anything else significant.
So, then I guess final question. What's your favorite item?
My favorite item? For planchettes, I have a love for J.W. Cottrell's Boston planchettes because they were most likely first. We don't have that definitive nail saying that Cottrell was first, but it's sure looks pretty likely it was him. So I have an affinity for the Boston planchettes, but the Kirby planchettes sure are works of art. And the number 4 plate class Kirby is certainly just the pinnacle of automatic writing. So I would say with planchettes, that one is probably a favorite. I would say the crown jewel is most certainly the Dr. Hare Spiritoscope. And so between those two, those are probably my favorite devices. I think it's an important story to tell, and there's a reason I tell this story, and I usually close my lectures with an anecdote about the snitch baby. The snitch baby is a 1920s device that we only knew through the patent record for many years. And it's a talking board, but it looks more like a slide rule. It's a wooden platform like this, and it has a little roller car, a planchette on the top of it that rolls back and forth. It's just on 4 little wheels. And we only knew about this device through the patent record for many years. In the patent record, there's far more undiscovered devices in the patent record than there are discovered devices. But one day, through my email, via some weird 90s era phone technology that I've still yet to discover. I literally got an email from a phone number attached to some weird phone plan, and I received what looked like 90 era flip phone pictures of what we now know as a snitch baby. We just knew it as a patent number, but it was one of these devices sitting on somebody's kitchen table, and it was called the Snitch Baby. So that was its trade name, which we'd never heard before. We've since uncovered a lot of literature on it. And this woman sent me these pictures along with a message asking for my number, and I called her, and she was ecstatic to introduce me to this device. And I informed her it was the only known surviving one of its kind. It was the first we'd ever seen. And in my excitement, asked her a lot of questions about it. She discovered it in the attic of her home. So I asked her a lot of questions about the home and, everything, just, trying to figure out anything we could to tell its story. And that was the conversation, right? I was trying to acquire it. She actually used the device and was hesitant to sell it. And the conversation would continue from there, certainly, right? Until I got a frantic phone call the very next morning. And she is hysterically crying and screaming. And I finally calm her down and find out what's wrong. And she says, well, you asked questions about the house, so I called my landlord to ask them. Well, she didn't tell me she didn't own the house. Her landlord owned the house, and she found it in the attic. So it's not her device at all. It belongs to her landlord. Unfortunately, her landlords were devout Mormon. Not Mormon. They're Seventh-day Adventist, Jehovah's Witness. One of and they immediately demanded for her to give up the device so that it could be destroyed. And she said they were coming to get it that evening. And so I go into emergency mode. I tell her to hang tight, stay by the phone. And I spend the next 4 or 5 hours trying to find a photographer in the middle of the Bible Belt that will take a photograph of something called the Ouija Snitch Baby. And no one would do it. I finally, thank God, after 4 or 5 hours, I still have the piece of paper where I marked off. I just wrote down all these numbers and marked them off. I took a picture of it, and yeah, finally, there's somebody. She said yes. And she drove into the city and delivered it to this photography studio who did a photo session with it for some cash. And I got the pictures. She brought it home. The woman picked it up and threw it in the trash barrel and destroyed it. And so we lost the only known surviving snitch baby. I mean, an artifact that to us is practically priceless. It can't be replaced. There might be another one out there. But for now, it's the only one, and now it's gone, thanks to belief and religion. And so I think that's a big motivator in why I do this, to spread the real history and to inform people of why they might believe what they do about these devices. And maybe, just maybe, they'll question whether or not that belief is correct or rational, and question that. And maybe we'll get through to the right person, and it'll change someone's mind next time they're hovering a Ouija over a trash barrel looking to destroy one. So with any luck, we'll keep the story told.